Hi guys. So I have been talking to a friend of mine who is learning what's called a constructed language. And this is someone I know who also watches my videos. You know who you are, so hi. And we were talking about the idea of me doing a video in one of these languages. And the more I started studying it, the more interested I became not only in the particular language, which is called Lojban, but the concept of constructed languages. And I think what also sparked this was I brought up Lojban to my professor in one of my psychology classes, thinking, what are the chances that he's going to know anything about this? And it turns out this professor of mine is a huge fan of constructed languages and has, in fact, made one of his own languages, which he talked to us a little bit about in class. But this was a language that he had attempted to construct in order to make a language that didn't have any nouns. And this was just remarkable to me. Like, he had said a sentence in it, and like for the word house, he used something that roughly translated into sheltering, so like it was a verb. It was about what the structure was doing rather than naming the noun that it was. So that sort of inspired me to look into this a little bit more. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about constructed languages and then read a few sentences from Lojban that, if you speak any Lojban, probably aren't going to make any sense because I don't know exactly how to pronounce things, and this is just 15 minutes on a Google search. So constructed languages, or conlang, is basically languages that have been sort of created by people, either experimentally or for specific purposes, often artistic. Some people prefer to call them planned or artificial, although some people also argue that technically all language is artificial. The most widely spoken constructed language is Esperanto, which has 2 million speakers, about 2,000 of which are native speakers, as in they speak Esperanto from birth. This seems to be particularly popular in places like Hungary and Russia, so a lot of Eastern Europe seem to have really caught on with this, and I can sort of get why. It's sort of one of those languages that, so the creator of this book called Unua Librum, which I'm probably going to mispronounce a lot of things in this video because I'm not native speakers of any of these languages. And so one of the main points was to render the study of language that's so easy it makes acquisition mere play to the learner. So the idea is to create a language that is very easy to learn. Also, the idea of Esperanto was to create a language. Second one was to create a language that enables the learner to make direct use of the knowledge with a person of any nationality, whether the language be universally accepted or not. So this is a little bit harder to get, but basically this language was created for international communication, which you can see why it might have caught on in places like Hungary and Russia, where there are lots of countries near each other in Europe that all speak totally different languages, and so the idea of having one language that everyone knows is such an appealing idea, because then you can hold on to your primary language, but then also speak a second language that you can go anywhere and speak. Unfortunately, this causes a lot of people to create a lot of different languages, and no one can decide on which one is the best and which one they should do. So hence we have so many different constructed languages. And then, of course, there's some people who just think their language is the best, like how a lot of people think about English, but there we go. The third point is something I can't quite grasp as much, but it says, to find some means of overcoming natural indifference of mankind and disposing of them in the quickest manner possible, and en masse to learn and use proposed language as a living one, not only in last extremities and with the key at hand. So what I gathered from that is basically they want this to be used as a real language. It's not purely theoretical. And not all constructed languages are seen that way. So there are three primary types. There are engineered languages, auxiliary languages, and artistic languages. So Esperanto is an example of an auxiliary language. It's devised for international communication. The idea is this language is your second language. Regardless of what your first language is, you can go to, if you are in Hungary and you speak Hungarian and Esperanto, then you can go to Russia and meet someone who speaks Russian and Esperanto, and you can communicate with them. And yet you still have your language from your country. It's sort of, you're not forcing everyone to only speak one language so that we can all communicate with each other, which is an idea that I really like, actually. It's a lot of people talk about learning other languages in order to learn to speak with other people. But the thing that I struggle with there is where I live, if you want to learn a second language, it makes the most sense to learn Spanish. If I were to move to, say, Canada, it might be more helpful to learn French. But to my family back home, it makes more sense for me to learn Hindi or one of the Indian languages. So I don't, have the time or energy to learn all of those languages, but I want to be able to talk with a lot of different people. So it helps to have some sort of standardization there. Another type is engineered languages, and this is where Lojban comes in. Engineered languages tend to be classified as either logical languages, philosophical languages, or experimental languages, so linguistically experimental. And there's a lot of overlap between these types here, particularly with experimental, because a lot of the logical and philosophical languages are also, you're experimenting with linguistics here, but they're engineered. They're trying to look at specific things. So Lojban is considered to be a logical language. And there's a lot of different stuff about its purpose, but the primary purpose is to reduce ambiguity, both semantically and syntactically. Basically, anytime you have a sentence and based on how the words are arranged, it's ambiguous. Think of any time where if you put inflection on the wrong word, it means something totally different. Basically, Lojban is trying to make, either make that not a thing or make that less a thing, at the very least. There's also a language called Tokipona, which I just sort of found when I was looking up different experimental languages, and this one caught my eye because it's a minimalist language. So this is described as being very similar to Pidgin, or if you know Pidgin English as the language, I guess a dialect or language depending on who you speak to, but in Hawaii and other sort of islands. And this actually is considered to be philosophical language because it comes from a lot of Eastern philosophy, like Taoism, gets incorporated into this language, and that's where this whole minimalism idea comes from. In terms of experimental language, I kind of struggled to find one that didn't already fall under logical or philosophical, like Lojban and Tokipona are both listed as experimental. But one example that I found interesting was Newspeak. So if you've ever read 1984, they'll say things, there's, Newspeak in 1984, and, they'll use words like double plus ungood instead of saying very bad. And so a lot of experimental languages play with what's called the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis, which is this hypothesis in linguistics that your language influences your thought. And this is particularly played with in Newspeak, where controlling the language that the people in the universe of 1984 speak, controlling that language, just Newspeak, and only allowing for Newspeak and not, Old Speak, which is what we call English, will control their thoughts. So if they don't want someone to think something, they just don't have words for it. So I find that particularly interesting from a psychological perspective, and it's been a long time since I've read 1984. But there's something interesting for you. And there's also, of course, the artistic languages, which are the languages that are created for pleasure, for fiction, secret languages, and mystical languages. So this is where we have Klingon and Elven. And I found it interesting in reading about artistic languages. One common bit, and I think that people will attempt for a lot, is native speakers of a given language. So again, Esperanto has 2,000 native speakers, and that's the biggest we've got. There has, as far as we know, been one attempt for a person to raise their child to speak Klingon, and it failed mainly because the child could not speak Klingon with anyone other than their parents. And I can honestly understand this. I was fluent in particular Indian language, Konkani, which is from the specific part of India that my family's from. And I was fluent in this until I started going to kindergarten, and then I lost it completely because it was my family and then maybe a couple of other families locally that spoke this language. Whereas when I went to school, no one else spoke this language, so I didn't really have that much motivation to keep it going. Maybe if this kid had been raised in an environment where other kids were also learning and speaking Klingon, then could have kept up with it. But it's really rough to try and teach a kid a language from a young age if no one else around them speaks it. So there you go. Some interesting stuff about constructed languages. So because I thought it would be interesting, particularly with a lot of people who enjoy hearing foreign languages or hearing, unintelligible whispering, I wanted to see how you guys responded to a constructed language, particularly this one, because I really like the way that it rolls off the tongue. At least when I've heard people speak Lojban, I really like the way that it sounds, and I think it lends itself to ASMR quite nicely. Just with the way that the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds mostly work. But you guys let me know what you think, and let me know if you are interested in me doing videos entirely in Lojban in the future. That would require a lot of learning and research, but we'll see. Maybe I can get a couple of my friends to help me out with that. Okay, so this is going to be a number of random sentences which don't make sense in context, but I just found a beginner's lesson on Lojban because I figured that would help me learn how to pronounce it at least, and I'm probably still butchering it, but I wrote it out on the screen behind you, and I'm going to read it out. And if any of you do speak Lojban, it's probably not going to make any sense, so my apologies. But at this point, it's just meant to sound nice. Shoit domesi Shmene sonisha. Idos shmenema. Mis shahot tavlatolo paskina. Ilos skina shumache shinri. Mi tavlatolo paskina elo krula. Mi pramido. Si prami mi. Ikut do dukni. Zehu. Imise pluka lo no mi benmido. Mise pluka. Se pluka. So there are a couple of those that are particularly like rolling off the tongue sounding, like si pluka mi pramido. So that one in particular, mi pramido, means I love you. So I really like the way that sounds. Mi pramido, mi pramido, mi pramido. And see the beginning sentence. Joy to mi sishmene zonisha. Means, hi, my name is Anisha. So you can tell that these came from very, beginning type lessons. But there you go. That's a bit of Lojban for you. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.